Good day, everyone. Welcome to the fifth edition of the BPP OC Annual Forum. It is an important milestone for our committee because for the past 5.5 years, we have provided a space for dialogue amongst issuer representatives, investor representatives, and of course, service providers. Today, I have the pleasure to host this fifth edition as chair of the BPOC with three important keynote speakers, Jen Sisson, Nel Mino, and Carmen Edinoia. We will start in a while with Jen Sisson, CEO of ICGN. And of course, we will also have the pleasure to host two panel discussions. The first one is on market views on service providers, where we will have issuer and investor representatives discussing matters relevant to service providers. And the second panel will be with service providers themselves, describing their everyday life, their modus operandi, and of course, their interaction with their clients. So welcome to this fifth edition. Without further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Jen. Jen, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm sure that all of our participants are really looking forward to your keynote. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Konstantinos, and to the Best Practice Principles Group for inviting me to join you all today. It's a real pleasure to be here with colleagues who share a commitment to high standards of stewardship and market integrity. At ICGN, our mission is clear: to advance effective standards of corporate governance and investor stewardship worldwide. Led by investors responsible for over $90 trillion in assets, ICGN has a unique role, convening the global stewardship community, promoting high standards, and advocating with regulators, policymakers, and companies to defend the integrity of markets. Now, stewardship is not a single function. It is an ecosystem. Asset owners, asset managers, proxy advisors, service providers, and regulators all play their part. And ICGN's role is to connect those actors, to foster collaboration, and to raise expectation of practice. We respect that stewardship is not one size fits all. Different investors have different priorities and approaches, but what matters is that investors have the freedom to choose their models and that all operate with transparency, accountability, and a commitment to long-term value creation. Within this ecosystem, proxy advisors play a vital supporting role. They provide independent, timely, and scalable research that empowers investors to exercise their voting rights responsibly, thoughtfully, across thousands of companies every year. And here's the reality. Modern global portfolios generate thousands of voting items each proxy season. So for any investor to analyze every resolution in-house would be prohibitively expensive. And for those costs would not just sit on a balance sheet in isolation, they would ultimately be passed on to real people, retirees, savers, workers, investing for their future. So proxy advisors provide a cost-efficient way to ensure informed voting can work at scale, while allowing investors to direct resources to engagement and oversight. Importantly, they do not replace investor responsibility. Decisions remain with the investors. Proxy advisors are trusted resources, they're not decision makers. I've said it before, and I will no doubt have to say it again. We need to be clear on the role and the activities of proxy advisors, because the willful misinterpretation of what they do is harmful. It's political and misleading, and it's not in the best interests of our end beneficiaries. Crucially, just like there is not one size fits all correct way to do corporate governance, there isn't one correct way to do stewardship. Investors, the clients, should remain free to decide for themselves how to best use proxy research within their stewardship model. And that freedom of choice is fundamental to the exercise of fiduciary duty and to well-functioning markets. The right to vote is not symbolic. It's the very foundation of public markets. It ensures that boards remain accountable to the investors who provide capital. It underpins confidence in markets. It supports long-term value creation, and it safeguards against abuse of power. If shareholder rights to exercise votes or to use external research in the investment process get restricted, then the ability of investors to act as responsible stewards is weakened. And that is ultimately going to be the savers and the beneficiaries who lose out. Yet, we are seeing growing pushback, and this is particularly in the United States. We're seeing significant headwinds where political and legal developments are directly challenging the role of proxy advisors and the rights of shareholders. So in Texas, Senate Bill 2337 imposes onerous new disclosure requirements on proxy advisors, forcing them to justify their recommendations in ways that are neither practical nor proportionate. So ICGN wrote directly to Governor Abbott earlier this year to warn that such legislation risks undermining the independence of proxy research. It adds cost and complexity, and ultimately we think it disadvantages the very savers whose capital is at stake. It's worth reiterating, additional burdens simply flow back to clients, then to beneficiaries. Now, of course, litigation is underway, but the uncertainty itself is destabilizing. In Delaware, the state legislature has considered amendments that tilt the balance of power away from shareholders and towards boards and controlling interests. In our March letter, ICGN stressed that weakening shareholder primacy would erode investor confidence in Delaware law, which is long considered the gold standard in the US. We caution that such reforms would send the wrong signal at a time when markets need reassurance that governance safeguards remain intact. And at the SEC, while we appreciate that expanding retail shareholder participation in voting is a good goal, we're deeply concerned about the risks in some of the implementation. We don't want to see companies having the ability to set up their retail shareholders to default vote with management on a perpetual basis. We need to make sure that safeguards are in place, that annual renewal is needed with clear and easy ways to change your mind, or the ability to make case-by-case considerations. And that's particularly important in the case of contested meetings, M&A, or other key issues that might arise. So coupled with steps towards companies mandating binding arbitration, these moves threaten to limit the voice of long-term institutional shareholders and really restrict their ability to hold boards accountable. So ICGN has spoken out consistently in letters and public statements. These are not measures that strengthen markets. They're measures that reduce investor choice, politicize stewardship, and ultimately put beneficiaries at risk. And let's be very clear again, when governance is weakened, it is ordinary people, savers, pensioners, and future retirees who lose the protections of effective oversight. And this is why it's so important to remind policymakers, companies, and the public of the practical realities. Stewardship requires cost-efficient tools, high-quality independent research, and the freedom for investors to decide how best to manage their responsibilities. And that's why I want to commend the Best Practice Principles Group. Your self-regulatory model is an important counterpoint to heavy-handed intervention. By advancing standards voluntarily and by embedding transparency and accountability into your framework, you're demonstrating that the industry is capable of upholding integrity without overly prescriptive regulation. But, and as I know you will agree, self-regulation must never be static. It must be continuously strengthened through openness, engagement, and responsiveness to the market and to society's expectations. That's how credibility can be sustained. Now, we often hear companies lobbying policymakers that your consulting services create conflicts of interest. The industry needs to respond to these concerns and create clarity on the protections in place to mitigate these perceived conflicts. Similarly, the broad misunderstanding of your benchmark voting policies creates a lot of unhelpful pushback. More must be done to explain the use of these policies and the reality of what they're telling the market. A benchmark recommendation isn't just you urging investors to vote one way or another. It's more of a reflection of what governance expectations that are broadly considered best practice would suggest. And look, we also face new markets and new dynamics in the stewardship market. Increasingly, asset managers are offering clients new forms of stewardship choice, including pass-through voting. Now, of course, this can be a positive step, empowering asset owner clients and end investors to have more direct influence over how their capital is stewarded. It aligns with the demand for greater choice and ownership. But we should be realistic. It does add complexity and it risks fragmentation. And if misunderstood or misused, it could be exploited in these politicized debates. And that's why ICGN calls for clarity, transparency and education around these models. Transparency is not just good practice, it's essential for trust. So we've got to build understanding of these new dynamics away from rhetoric. The reality is nuanced and technical, and it must be anchored in the fundamentals, building and encouraging efficient, effective, and accountable governance practices that support long-term sustainable value creation for real people investing for their futures. So I'll leave with a simple and I hope powerful message. For ICGN, G is key. At ICGN, we've always emphasized the importance of governance as the bedrock of sustainable capital markets. Governance and stewardship are not optional. It's the framework that holds the whole system together. Thoughtful, well-informed voting is critical for effective stewardship. It's how investors uphold accountability, safeguard shareholder rights, and sustain the fundamentals of corporate governance. So in these challenging times, we need to continue to defend shareholder rights, support credible self-regulation, and keep governance at the heart of all of our work. Because when governance is strong, the markets can thrive. When governance is weakened, trust can collapse. And without trust, it's the people we are all here to serve, our end beneficiaries, that are the ones who will lose. So have a great conference this afternoon and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Very, very insightful keynote, as it's always the case with you, and we couldn't be happier to have you as our opening keynote today. And I will, of course, keep a couple of key messages from your keynote. Of course, there are more than a couple, but service providers provide services. They do not bear the responsibility. Investors bear the responsibility, and I think that the issuer community needs to keep on bearing that in mind. The second thing that I would like to also point out is the thing you mentioned about the importance of soft law instruments as the one we have and the one we oversee as oversight committee to keep on evolving as time goes by, because of course soft law is not static. The beauty of soft law is exactly its capacity to keep on evolving in a much more agile way compared to hard law instruments. Hard law instruments that we keep on, of course, commenting as drastic, as purporting to change modus operandi in an overnight. And of course, that's why we keep on looking back to soft law measures, exactly because they depict evolving practices in a much, much more flexible way. So of course, the message is clear also for our oversight committee. And on that note, I would like to say that at the end of today's event, I will be announcing the introduction of a new protocol for the BPOC, which will definitely be of interest to all attendees, and not just, of course, to the attendees of this event today, but to regulators, to issuers, and to investors, and of course, to service providers themselves. It's another demonstration that we keep on, together with the BPPG, together with the signatory parties, we keep on helping each other to evolve within this soft law framework. So thank you so much again. I will allow myself to move you off stage, because I know that you will be watching us in the next couple of hours. Thank you again, Jen. Thank you. And I will now move on stage our esteemed member at the BPOC, Professor Anna Tilba from Durham University Business School. Professor Tilba is our chair of the review subcommittee. She has been with the BPPG for many years. She was, of course, also a part of the Danielle Mellis independent review that gave birth to the BPOC. And of course, Anna started working for the BPOC as independent reviewer, and a few years later, she became one of the esteemed members of the BPOC. So her presentation today is the presentation of the annual review of the BPP signatory party statements. And I am sure that she will have lots of interesting empirical data to share with us. Anna, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Konstantinos, and welcome to our 5th edition of our stakeholder forum. As Konstantinos mentioned, it has been my privilege to serve on the Oversight Committee, first as the independent reviewer and later on being chair of the reviewing subcommittee. So I've seen firsthand the significant changes and progress that has been made in reporting and transparency of proxy voting service providers, from having no principles and no reporting at all to having already 5 years of continuous progress in reports that we see and that I see. So without further ado, the results are in, as they say in Eurovision. But I will try to share my slides for this. If I could share my slides, where is the share? I don't think I have the. Konstantinos, can you share my slides? Because I don't seem to have a share function.
I can surely do that. You should be able, if you enlarge your screen, to have it right in the middle, the green button. If you do not have it, because I have enabled you.
Oh, yes, I do see that. Yes, I've enlarged my screen. Thank you.
Perfect. Off you go. Thank you.
Happens.
The Eurovision results.
Right. Just a second. So I will share my slides right now. I hope you can all see my slides.
Perfect, Anna. Thank you.
Excellent. Let me just click on. Okay, so I hope my slides will move to the overview and outline. Konstantinos, has they moved?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. So in a very short presentation I will have today, I will obviously present the fifth round of the signatory submission, providing a general overview and comments. I will introduce, as always, as I do in these forums, our methodology and a short summary of reporting of where we are, what has been achieved, and where we're going next. So just to emphasize the significance of what has been achieved to date, what you see here is an extract, a screenshot from the BPPG signatory statement website. And this information is available to everybody. Unlike some other reporting mechanisms, like maybe the Stewardship Code, where you can only see first year or the latest year, actually in the BPG side, we keep all of the reports so everybody can access it and see the progress made in reporting when the reports are there, when they've been downloaded, and also obviously with the links to the signatory sites. And in the bottom corner, you will also see all the contact information of each signatory so people can contact them. So from the point of view of transparency, to have this bank, this archive of reporting is important, because you can see, you can trace accountability from what has been reported in the first year to how progress has been made to the final year that we're doing, or the fifth year that we're doing here today. So this is quite a lot of work. So we are very proud and happy to be able to have this information and create a space where people and the stakeholders can visit the site and actually see it for themselves. So very quickly on the methodology, for all the years that I've been reviewing, it goes something like this. We receive the signatory statements going into summer. I then carry out a comparative analysis of all the statements, looking for best practices, best examples across all the signatories. I prepare an overview and our kind of feedback, where in the letters form we express our appreciation for the changes in practice, but also highlight suggestions for improvements. So the drafts of the letters I then send to the chair of the oversight committee, which is Konstantinos, obviously. Then we have a meeting of the reviewing subcommittee, consisting now of Fabio, Bonamore, Glenn Davis, and even Epstein, and who's been very helpful in providing their views and views on how we should proceed. So I then incorporate all the feedback I received from the members into the letters. I revise the letters and prepare them for the approval of the Oversight Committee, which then the whole committee looks at the final drafts. We have a discussion on this on our Q3 meeting. On the 26th of September, we had our meeting where the letters of this year were approved, and then Konstantinos sends the letters to the signatories. So this is how it's always been, and this is, I think, a very effective way of doing this review. So on the sort of first impressions of this year's general comments is that obviously now all signatories provide separate and detailed feedback. As the years of reporting carry on and continue, we've I think achieve a fair amount of open and honest engagement. So signatories provide us either with confidential feedback, or indeed they include the responses of how they responded to our feedback in their own public reporting statements. So again, the stakeholders could see the changes that are made as a result of reporting. Some signatories, I will not cover all of them, but these are just really quick examples. For example, EOS were seeking further meetings and email conversations about our feedback and ascertaining how best to address our comments, which again shows commitment and willingness to engage with the Oversight Committee and report to the best of the abilities. PERC this year significantly revised the format of the principles, and if you will go to the website and compare, you will see a significant difference in how PERC now reports on the BP principles. So again, a very notable changes and positive changes. Minerva provides integrated reporting, and this year they had even more detailed explanation of how each principles aligns with both stewardship code reporting and the best practice principles. Glass Lewis again expanded the information available in their proxy reports and how we can see the reports on their platform. And I will say that ISS did, to our, of course, happiness, added an acknowledgement that that they view BPP as credible and robust self-monitoring mechanism, which promotes improved transparency and confidence. And I think this emphasizes the significance and the positive work that has been carried out in this initiative. So you can see here in the final table below that all signatories were compliant with all three principles of best practice. Just a general summary on the notable practices of this year, and I must say it gets harder and harder to pick up good practices for a year on, because obviously the responses are there, and so I'm not mentioning all the other years that has gone by, so I'm focusing only on this year. And of course Jen actually did mention that a lot we need to learn more and know more about the voting policies, and you'll be pleased to know that I think all signatories to the principles this year provided a very detailed additions and updates and explanations on how they construct and reach their benchmarking voting policies. So notably this year, there's been a lot more information provided across all signatories on this very topic. Also, quite a few updates, more disclosure on service quality assurance, useful information such as how signatories deal with error tracking. ISS also increased the number of days, improved the timeliness of providing the reports. So from 19 days to 21 days now ahead of the AGMs. Also useful updates on the volumes of work and their diversity and characteristics has been presented to us. And on principle 2, again, the engagement with the Oversight Committee and the impact of the work we jointly do together does now figure more prominently in reporting, which also, I hope, serves to emphasize the collaborative nature of this initiative in order to increase or strengthen the opinion of the stakeholders. Now, direction of travel, obviously, the lot of things that has been achieved, we still look to the future and other things that still need to be hopefully done. We continue to advocate for things like looking at statistic tracking, year on and year on reporting on how we track the errors and any other changes that are happening in organizations year on, year out. Another, I think, important element was staff diversity. PERC actually went ahead and disclosed more characteristics, diversity characteristics, other than just gender of their employees. So we do continue to advocate for disclosure, broader disclosure on diversity characteristics. And of course, I think this has been a point that I've mentioned last year. We do realize that different signatories have different revenue models. So we welcome more information and, as always, more disclosure on the sources of revenue. So that is it from me. I think I've talked enough. If I stop sharing now. And that's all from me for this year, Konstantinos. Thank you.
Excellent, Anna. Thank you again for your stellar contribution to our committee's mission again for another year. We are really, really grateful for your really hard work on the annual review of the statements. I will move you off stage as well, and we will see you later. Thank you again. And now I have the pleasure to gradually welcome on stage our first panel, the panel Market Views on the Best Practice Principles. As I mentioned in the beginning of this event, we will have issuer and investor representatives discussing service providers, proxy advisors, and of course the best practice principles. So I have the pleasure to welcome my esteemed co-member of the BPP OC, Alia Fazal, Head of Corporate Governance at BP, who will be moderating this panel discussion. Welcome, Alia, and thank you again for accepting to moderate this, and of course for your ongoing work. Alia is also a member of their forum subcommittee, so what we have achieved today in terms of program, it also thanks goes to Alia and of course to Mike Macaulay as well, the other esteemed member. And I have the pleasure to also welcome to the panel Jennifer Coulson, Senior Managing Director and Global Head ESG at BC Investment Management. Jennifer, I'm moving you on stage as we speak. And Daniel Jarman, Stewardship Manager at Pension Protection Fund. Daniel, bear with me 1 second as I'm moving you on stage. We then have the pleasure to have amongst our panelists Tony Richelieu, Vice President, Corporate Secretary and Associate General Counsel at KB Home, whom I will move on stage as we speak. And of course, last but not least, Jenn-Hui Tan, Chief Sustainability Officer at Fidelity International, whom I will also move on stage as we speak. And then I will leave to Alia the pleasure to moderate this first panel. I trust that everyone is on stage. Perfect. Excellent. Thank you all again for accepting our invitation. We are looking forward to a truly interesting discussion. Alia, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Konstantinos. As Konstantinos has already said, it's my great pleasure to welcome you all here to our first panel today. As Konstantinos mentioned, I have been with the member of the subcommittee and also a member of the review subcommittee, as well as the oversight committee, I beg your pardon, since the start of the last year. So really looking forward to the discussion today. And I'm joined by some highly regarded panelists today, representing a broad spectrum of market stakeholders in terms of representation from asset owners, asset managers, and also corporate issuer as well. I will invite them each in a moment to introduce themselves more fulsomely. But as I do so, I would be really grateful if each of you could share with the audience today some insights into your relationship with the advisory firms. Just sort of asking you to reflect, what does your organization's direct contact consist of? Just to give a bit of a scene setting for our audience. Tony, if you'd like to kick us off.
Sure. Thank you, Alia. And thank you for having me on the panel. Again, as Konstantinos mentioned, I'm Vice President, Corporate Secretary, Associate General Counsel of KB Home. I've been with KB Home for 21 years. I'm also a board member of the Society of Corporate Governance. Just want to make sure, as far as a level setting, that the views I'm expressing here is my own, honestly, of my organization. Our interaction with proxy advisory firms are principally with ISS and Glass Lewis, as we're a US-based company. We subscribe to a lot of ISS consulting services, executive compensation, governance suite, and we also are signed up with Governance Hub with Glass Lewis, which allows us access to the voting recommendation reports. And sort of leveraging off that, we also get the recommendation reports from ISS and Glass Lewis every year. So we have a sense of what they're recommending to their clients. Our interactions with them in terms of the voting recommendations usually are sometimes when we have a very significant issue, we will engage with them in terms of trying to understand their position or attempt to. One thing I should mention with KB Home, we're kind of a mid-sized US company, and sometimes our ability to interact with ISS seems maybe a little bit less than maybe an S&P 500 company. But we do make an effort when we feel that they've made a factual error. I think that sort of sets the stage about, how we interact with them for the most part.
No, that's great. That's really helpful, Tony. I'm sure we'll unpack some of the detail around some of the points you raised there as we carry on the conversation. Turning to Jennifer, please introduce yourself.
Great. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. I am located in British Columbia, Canada, with BC Investment Management, and we are one of the larger institutional investors here in Canada, managing about 300 billion in assets under management. So yes, I head up our ESG team. There are 19 of us currently dedicated to ESG across all asset classes. And when it comes to proxy voting, we obviously have several people on the team actively engaged in that process, executing. So our interactions with the service providers would be everything from using the voting platform to actually deliver our votes. We use them for our public disclosure. All of our votes are public ahead of the meeting. We obviously use research from a couple of different service providers as inputs into our process, and we have a very customized policy specifically with ISS. So spend quite a bit of time ahead of the voting season, making sure that our custom voting policy is well understood ahead of the volume that comes in the spring. And of course, we contribute to their policy surveys, as they survey their clients. So we're very active in terms of providing our views to make sure that the practices do reflect our views in the market. And I think I'll leave it at that.
That's really great, Jennifer. Thank you so much. Jenn-Hui?
Hi, Alia. And hi, everyone. I'm talking to you from London in what has turned out to be a nice sunny afternoon, unusually. Um, so Fidelity is a large asset manager. We are subscribers to both Glass and ISS for their research, and we supplement that with local market specialists in India, China, and Australia. Um, I think, like most other large fund managers, we have our own voting policy. We do our own vote analysis, and we make our own judgments and apply our own level of oversight. And the primary role of the providers is as an input into that.
Thank you so much. And Daniel.
Hello, thanks. Thanks for your time today, everybody. My name is Daniel Jarman, Stewardship Manager at the Pension Protection Fund. I cover all asset classes, but the majority of my career has been on the equities side. I also spent a decade working for ISS, and also some time with Minerva as well. So I've experience on that side of the fence. In terms of our proxy voting environment at the PPF, we work with Hermes EOS, taking their voting and engagement overlay services. Given the number of equity holdings that we have, we wouldn't be able to effectively cover that with the size of our team. So we do I partner with the team at EOS to make sure we're receiving what we consider to be a high level of oversight and company engagement. We also have access to the ISS research reports, and we'll often refer back to those for the baseline information. In prior roles, I've used the custom voting research services of ISS also.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you. And as you can see here that clearly we've got a really good coverage across many of the BPP members. So, it'd be really good to get into the discussion. So just sort of kicking things off then in terms of, can you just give us perhaps an idea around what are your sort of views of the impact and influence of advisory firms, and to what extent from your organization's perspective do you feel that that impact is positive or not? And how do the BPP, the best practice principles, how do they play a role in that? Jennifer, if I may start with yourself.
Sure, and I think Jen Sisson provided some nice tidbits around this as well in her keynote. Obviously, they play a very important role, but they are just part of the landscape. It would be impossible for us to vote thousands of companies in such a short amount of time without some kind of service provider and the research input. So they're a pretty essential part of the landscape. But I do think there are many myths around the significance of that influence and the nature of that influence. So as I mentioned, we provide our inputs into, ISS's and Glass Lewis's, policy survey. So when they're coming up with their benchmark policy, it is largely reflective of their client base. And I think, you obviously will have a small segment of the market that may be robo voting, as people like to say, who don't have the internal resources, and so they do choose a policy to support. So I don't think it's an uninformed decision. It is an informed decision on which policy they want to support. But that really is a small part of the market, and I think if you listen to some of the rhetoric It really is exaggerated. You would think all of us are just on complete autopilot, being told by ISS and Glass Lewis what to do. So they're pretty essential part of the market, but also just want to caution that maybe the headlines don't necessarily reflect the nuances of the influence.
Yeah, so definitely kind of looking to maybe bust some of those myths that exist. Jenn-Hui, what's your view on this from Fidelity's perspective?
Yeah, look, I think it's very similar to Jennifer's. I think they play a role in providing benchmark research, and they also help to we outsource certain operational aspects of the voting process. The biggest misunderstanding really is I see from the issuer community on the importance that the advisors play in the judgments that large asset owners and large asset managers make. There is oftentimes, I think, a confusion of correlation and causation. Oftentimes, we will agree with what the proxy voter recommends, so we will vote the same way, which is not the same thing as voting as they instruct us to vote. So I think that probably needs to be better understood. I would say from the asset manager's perspective, the value of the benchmark research recommendations is in the quality of that underlying research. And that quality is diminished if that research is being compromised in any way, or requirements being placed on top of it that prevent that objectivity from coming through. And I think that's part of what we're concerned in the current landscape today, and something that I think the whole ecosystem needs to think more about.
Yeah, and so that sort of conflicts of interest piece, perhaps, influencing the integrity of the research and the objectivity of it. The best practice principles then, in terms of focusing on the conflicts of interest, do you feel that that's had a significant impact?
Yeah, look, yes, I think this isn't. Some of these things are reflections of what's happening in a very near-term political environment. So I think the effect of the principles isn't evident at this point yet. I think the principles provide a strong underpin for what the service providers should do and should sign up to, and I think that's important. And I also think it's very important because it combats against other forms of harder regulation that we see markets starting to propose to regulate proxy advisors, which is based, I think as both Jennifer and I have said, on a misunderstanding of the role of proxy advisors more broadly. So I think that's where the BPP principles are particularly helpful. But equally, I think what we're seeing evolve now is happening pretty quickly. So I don't think we're yet at the end of that particular journey on how this space evolves.
No, sure. And I mean, Tony, as the representative of the issuer community here today, what are your thoughts about that sort of misunderstanding, those myths that are there?
I know, I appreciate my fellow panelists' view of the myths and misunderstandings. I mean, there is, I think, in some cases in the issuer community, the idea that ISS, at least in the US, has a mythical status of influencing your vote. We see statistics, reported like, if ISS recommended against, this level of support was attained, whether it's say on pay or an equity plan proposal. So you get that sort of statistical reporting, you kind of make your own, judgments about the connection there. I think from our own company's perspective, we see once we get our initial tabulation report after ISS or Glass Lewis have issued their proxy voting reports, you already have a certain, chunk of votes that have come in. And, from our perspective, we're not clear whether those are robo votes or, client directed votes. They just sort of already fill the tabulation sheet. I will say also for, when we speak to investors who may not necessarily follow ISS, but they subscribe to ISS or subscribe to Glass Lewis, in our engagements, although our engagements have changed after recent SEC regulations, but in our engagements, we're often asked, well, ISS said X about your policy. How do you respond? And so that becomes the basis for conversation. So there's an influence there from the proxy advisors' research reports that isn't evident necessarily that the client is I mean, they may be forming their own thoughts, but the predicate or the core of the discussion is what is the proxy advisor saying? So that's another point of influence that we experience from the corporate side.
No, that's really interesting. And before we come on to Daniel, I mean, Tony, just give us a little bit of a sense. You mentioned it at the outset, but in terms of your access to the proxy advisors and the ability to relay your messages, and then the influence that they then can have based on the information from yourselves. Give us a bit of a sense of that. What is your access like? The quality of the engagement with them? You know, what does that feel like for yourselves?
I mean, I think when we actually are able to connect with them, our access is pretty good. They do listen. I would say they don't always sort of accept, you know, the points you raise, but they do listen. They do take the time to hear us out when we engage. You know, there are certain aspects that we have that we, maybe more specific to our company, for example, we, as house builders, we feel like we're in our own little industry group, but we're part of a larger GICS group. And so sometimes we're evaluated, at least in the ISS world, against companies that are in different industries altogether. So sometimes we have comments like, you know, you're evaluating us against a smartwatch maker. Does that make sense? You know, and so we have dialogue around that. So, you know, I think they hear us, they listen to us, but, you know, ultimately they make their own decision about, you know, how they either want to change their voting recommendations or perhaps more on the sort of governance scoring side.
Yeah, so I guess it's that ability to influence the peer group that you're being compared against and sort of measured against is, yeah, perhaps provides some challenges from your perspective, it sounds like.
It is. I mean, I think it's difficult, you know, in this sort of ecosystem to have individualized voting recommendations at scale. You know, it's just a challenging thing to pull off. So, you know, you sort of accept that and you sort of design or approach your, you know, investor engagement policy during proxy season or outside of it, sort of with that in mind.
Sure, great. And I just want to bring Daniel in here. What are your thoughts on the different issues that have been raised so far?
Yeah, so I agree with Jen and Jennifer on the points raised there, and you know the complexity of some of the like voting environments which are in place now, you know, becoming much more complex. I've written from the ISS standard recommendation to the custom research report, which you know could be based on like one of like half a dozen off-the-shelf policies, through the additional analysis undertaken by the investment managers. But then you've also got like pass-through voting, which we're seeing play like a more significant role around the world. You know, and that adds another layer of like complexity and blocks, or makes it more challenging for issuers to understand who's really saying what. In terms of the overall environment, you know, that I do think, like certainly historically, that there's been a lot of discussion in the market, certainly when talking to issuers from advisors who you know, like to portray ISS and Glass Lewis as all-encompassing and powerful organisations. I'm not sure if that's been particularly helpful, but on the flip side of that, there are very good advisors out there who genuinely understand how different stewardship teams work and who to talk to, you know, when there's a tight voting deadline, so they can get things done. So overall, it's a much more complex environment than is often portrayed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, in terms of that complexity that you mentioned there, how sort of question to you, Ori, how has that complexity evolved? How have the role of proxy advisory firms you know, developed over time? And if you're able to, you know, are there any thoughts around how the introduction of best practice principles has influenced that evolution?
I think since the best practice principles were introduced, the level of disclosure, is like significantly increased, like around like policy development. I think as well, and it was mentioned earlier, having the principles in place offers at least like a first line of defence for like potentially tougher and like not appropriate industry oversight. So yeah, I'd say under like policy and like guidelines sort of disclosure for issuers so they know where they stand.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, we participate actively in the ISS and GLASS policy surveys and their roundtables. And so we are quite clear on how that is formed. That said, I think it's not a secret we had concerns earlier this year with how ISS changed its policy approach to diversity, and also how it's changed some of the application of its principles in terms of environmental and social shareholder proposals, particularly in the United States. That said, I think policies is one thing. I think the application of the policies is a completely different thing. A lot of people think that proxy advisor policies are black and white. And the reality is that there is an enormous amount of judgment that's applied each time. And it's impossible, I think, to scrutinize on every single case. It's not practical. And so I think, that's why it's incumbent on asset managers implementing any policies to be very clear on the underlying rationale and to agree with it fundamentally. The other thing I'd say sort of, and I think Tony is right to call out in some ways the influence of proxy advisors. So I see how that has occurred. It occurs in two ways. One, because given the volume of votes, so Fidelity, for example, my organization, we vote over 4,000 shareholder meetings every year. There's about 10 to 20 items on every ballot. You need some way to filter the things that you look at. And proxy advisor recommendations and deviations from that is one way of filtering. So it's a way of flagging something for analysis rather than determining whether something is right or not. And the other thing is that then when we go and engage with issuers, and we always do try and do that, particularly if we are thinking about voting against, a neutral way to frame the question is not, I've looked at it and I disagree. It's ISS have this view, but what is your view? Because I'm coming to my own judgment here.
Yeah, and sorry, I would just add in terms of the influence of the principles. I mean, it's from my perspective, it's been a great response to the push for more regulation is having this market-based approach. That really has improved, I would say, the transparency that we see from the providers, but also accountabilities, right? I mean, it's shown a light, I think, on some of the weaknesses in the business model and tried to kind of plug that gap, if I can say that. So, you see more transparency around, like corporate clients, for instance, right? Like you can see a list of clients that they might have, or you see, and I'm not sure, I think Tony's already alluded to like having access. I mean, I don't think that existed, 10 years ago, where like corporates were really frustrated. And I would always hear like we can't get a hold of anybody, right, at ISS or Glass Lewis. And now there's kind of more formal mechanisms. I think like if you have a concern, if you're worried about factual representation, in the report, there's a way for you to express that. So I do feel like on transparency and accountability, it really has provided a very valuable, missing link.
No, that's really helpful. And you mentioned about the surveys earlier. In terms of that transparency, and I guess the accountability as well, in terms of how the proxy firms actually formulate their views. What's been your experience around the opportunity for that engagement to feed into their policy development?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's extensive, I would say. So, there's ample opportunity. for the clients of the service, to provide that input. But of course, corporates and their consultants are free to participate in some of those surveys as well. So I think there is a multi-stakeholder approach. I mean, at the end of the day, I think we're the paying client. So I feel like views should represent those who pay for the service. So I think there is ample opportunity, and I would just underscore what you said, Jenn-Hui, is we were very disappointed as well with the ISS response to the diversity conversation, particularly for this reason that this was not expressed through the client feedback mechanism, right? This was kind of a response at a very odd time that was not really informed by client input. So really would kind of underscore that need to make sure that all of these policy recommendations are based on the client's views of these issues.
Absolutely. And I just want to invite anybody else really, but in terms of that point of participation and the ability to feed into the proxy firms policy development, any other thoughts from the panel? Perhaps Tony, from your perspective as a corporate issuer, do you have any opportunity that you avail in terms of not being a client of the proxy firms, but the fact that they do open up the surveys and there are other opportunities? Is that something that as an issuer you have participated in in the past?
We don't directly participate in those surveys. I mean, I appreciate that they are putting the surveys out, that they're trying to get a wide range of stakeholder views on like what's the best approach to take on a given topic or issue. We have not directly participated in them. I will say in terms of our experience and maybe the impact of the best practices principles, I have noticed that recently ISS has sent out in advance of the voting recommendations, basically a factual data sheet, and asked us to turn around. It's kind of a short period of time, but they asked us to turn around like, hey, are there any errors here? Just bring them to our attention. I appreciate that sort of proactive approach. And we also have noticed that their reports are coming out earlier. We used to, file a proxy statement and then we'd wait 4 weeks, 5 weeks for the report to come out. Now it seems more like 2 weeks, maybe a week and a half. Sometimes we're even surprised how quickly it comes out. So that has improved. So at least early on in the season, like what the recommendations are, and you can plan and prepare accordingly. And so I think there are some positive influences I would say from my corporate seat as far as the best practices principles.
That's really helpful. And just opening it up again to all of the panel members today. Well, what do you see as the potential challenges for the role of advisory firms with there's a lot of evolution just generally going on in the world. How do you feel the BPP, the best practice principles, can aid in meeting those challenges?
So look, I think the biggest challenge now is probably political risk. I see the proxy advisors as being quite vulnerable. And I think the BPP principles in providing that sort of soft law approach has is one way of demonstrating effective regulation without needing to have sort of formal rules around what the proxy advisors do, which could damage the quality of the market. If I think more broadly about the market itself, in an ideal world, you would have firms that could compete on the quality of that research, and asset managers would make decisions on who to purchase those services from based on that quality. I think the reality is that the market structure is a relatively low margin business with very high barriers to entry. And so what that does is create a lot of incumbency. Asset managers that care about this subject will generally choose to fund the build out of internal teams, like Jennifer and mine and Daniel's firms, to be able to do our own research overlay, and so you're left with a market structure that effectively reflects the economic reality.
Yeah, I mean it's a challenging business model, right? So I totally appreciate the challenges that are presented by that. So I'd say the same thing in terms of I would love to see more market competition. But I also don't think it's the only industry where there's a couple of large incumbents that dominate the space. So I don't think it's unique, but I think it often gets presented as being very unique and something nefarious when it's really not. But I think what would really help is if the BPP could really play that larger role, like globally, to really educate and bring to light some of these myths, right? Because, and I'm speaking as someone in North America, we don't hear a lot about BPP. So I don't know if maybe it's more focused on Europe. But I don't hear a lot of talk about BPP here in this context in Canada or the US. So I think there is a kind of a communications strategic thoughtful leadership here that the BPP could play, because I really feel like there's a bit of a vacuum and people are really not aware of some of these things that have really evolved and changed in the last 5 to 7 years, let's call it.
Yeah, great. Well, I mean, that is the opportunity for us, Konstantinos and the other members of the BPP OC to spread that word and to make that awareness increase and broaden in scope. So yeah, no, very well said there, Jennifer. Daniel, any thoughts?
Nothing additional, just I fully support Jennifer's comments on like the role of or visibility of the BPP globally. We see the ICGN stepping up, taking like quite visible stances on various issues, and I think the BPP could do more in terms of making sure they're a visible participant in some of these conversations.
No, sure. And I mean, just picking up on what you were saying earlier around the impact of pass-through voting, how do you see pass-through voting and also the potential for auto voting, given the Exxon case recently? How do you see that may impact the role of proxy advisory firms?
In terms of the impact on proxy advisory firms, I think the impact is much more significant on the investment managers and the underlying companies in terms of understanding like the vote, the influence that they have, like from an investment management perspective, and then for the issuer understanding, what factors were in play when the votes were being taken. So I think it is on the transparency side of things. We'll see if there needs to be more development. Overall, I think it's a good thing to have in the market, but I think there will be some hurdles to overcome.
So my view is that pass-through voting is a great idea if the end user is well resourced and they know what they're doing. And I would suggest that less well-resourced asset owners and retail shareholders are probably better off choosing an asset manager that has a well-resourced stewardship function and an aligned set of priorities to what they would like to have as their own. I don't think it serves our market well to have votes determined mechanicalistically without any reference to the nuance that Tony is speaking of around some of the decisions that corporates need to make and the trade-offs that they need to make.
Yeah, no, I certainly support that view from my personal perspective in terms of working for a company in the oil and gas sector, where often those nuances are very, very difficult to communicate through the layers of ownership to actually reach the underlying retail holder. So certainly that's something that's very prevalent in my mind, at least. Tony, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's interesting in terms of the retail shareholder vote. We, through our proxy statement and other disclosures we make on our website, and we try to inform our shareholders, be they institutional, be they retail investors, to try and make informed decisions about our company, whether to invest in our shares or vote in our shares. I think there's been sort of a market, and I hate to use the word failure, but like there's been an issue about trying to encourage more retail voting, because from the bulk of retail votes, they don't really come in. I think with the ExxonMobil approach, it's one approach. There are others that can come out. I think in 2023, As You Sow and Proxy Impact put out an As You Vote robo-voting for ESG principles, and they invited retail investors as well as institutional investors to do it, and they described it as set and forget ESG voting. So these kinds of mechanisms, I think, are kind of burbling up, and I think it's at least worth thinking about how can we encourage more retail voting. How can we get them involved? Because most retail voters maybe they don't care. That's obviously one aspect of it. But if they do care and they're just busy and they've got other things going on, is there a way that a transparent and effective voting mechanism can be set up to make sure that their voice is heard in the final result of an annual meeting?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jennifer.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add that I totally understand the notion of asset owners wanting to exercise their own rights. And again, if they are well resourced, that's great. I do have some sympathy for issuers when it comes to this, right? Because I do think it adds complexity for them. I mean, there's already, anecdotally, I hear from some issuers that have to talk to, maybe 15 different people within the same organization, because there's, passive mandates, there's different active mandates. PMs might have one view, stewardship teams have a different view. And now if you start to kind of bifurcate with pass-through voting, like there's just going to be a lot of mixed signals in the system. So I do have an appreciation that it's going to add even more complexity for issuers when you're trying to kind of figure out what's the common signal here from the investor community. And of course the Exxon case too, I can't help but comment on that one, because I think the biggest concern we would have with that situation is really the opt-in, opt-out kind of nature of it. So the fact that retail investors really do, like, they have to have an awareness and a knowledge that this is happening and very actively kind of opt out. And so in a way, Exxon is really encouraging the robo voting that they claim to not like, right, and not appreciate. So definitely concerned with that precedent. But I totally agree with Tony that retail voting, it's been a problem for ages, right? And we haven't been able to solve that. But I'm not sure if just the automatic vote with management is really encouraging the retail base to get involved. It's really just encouraging additional robo voting in the system.
No, really great to have your thoughts there. And on the, I suppose, theme of robo or kind of automated processes, it would be remiss not to mention AI, and actually what is the what is the opportunity or the risk associated with AI playing a role in this ecosystem? Any thoughts on that?
Oh, I mean, like so much in AI, I think, it's at the moment more promise and speculation than it is reality. I think it could be net positive for proxy advisors. I think it could make their workflow more efficient. They could evaluate quicker. They could implement custom voting policies from asset managers quicker as well. They could focus more time on the higher value add proposals, the edge cases, M&A transactions, so on and so forth. So I think there's a potential efficiency gain there. At the same time, there's a potential for greater industry disruption. I refer to this industry as having quite high barriers to entry. AI could lower that. It could be easier to scale and deploy voting research, which might improve the underlying market structure. It might encourage asset managers to take even more proxy voting in-house than we currently already do. If we got to a point where we felt we didn't need to have that input, or where perception of reliance on that input became detrimental.
Daniel, I could see you nodding there. Any thoughts from your side?
Nothing additional. Yes, the industry as a whole has always embraced technology from what I've seen to achieve efficiencies. I see no reason why that approach would change for AI. It could open the market up, make it more competitive, as noted. So yeah, overall, I think the industry will keep on evolving.
Great, thank you. Jennifer, Tony, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been well covered, right? With AI, it's always balancing that risk and opportunity. And we just haven't had enough experience with it yet to fully understand and appreciate, the risks and obviously the hallucinations, the errors. I mean, that could just amplify, some of the downside risks, but clearly there's opportunities. We're looking at ways internally, if it can improve our workflows and what we focus on. So yes, balancing risk and opportunity is the key there.
Yeah,
I would
absolutely.
I would agree with Jennifer's view of that, in terms of if it helps make more individualized voting decisions for each company, I think that would be a net positive with, the risk of hallucination. I think another potential area, at least from the corporate side, is that it would be another sort of, black box, voting tool that, from our perspective, sometimes has been the perspective as far as the proxy advisors go. So I think that would be, in terms of the BPP principle of transparency, I think that would be salient if, more AI is employed.
No, absolutely. Really well said. Konstantinos, I'm not sure we've had any questions through so far, which is a contrast to last year, because I think last year it ran over quite heavily with the questions. So
it did.
We must not keep the curiosity.
Thanks, Alia. I did invite our audience to submit any Q&As. They still have the time to do it. Nothing is coming our way. So that leaves me with thanking you and our esteemed panelists for a truly interesting discussion. I think it's very important to keep on gathering market views on service providers. And of course, I would like to, as I'm moving them off stage one by one, I would like to invite everyone to take a comfort break, and we will start again in 13 minutes with the panel with the service providers themselves. And then we will have the two keynotes from Nell Minow, Chair of Value Edge Advisors, and of course, Carmina Di Noia, Director for Financial Enterprise Affairs at the OECD, where Carmina will actually present the ongoing results of the most recently published OECD fact book, but also most importantly for our purposes today, he will be actually announcing some latest news regarding the upcoming paper on proxy advisors that will be published early 2026 by the OECD. So thank you again to all of our panelists and to you, Alia, personally for moderating this excellent panel. And let's take a comfort break and let's reconvene in 12 minutes. Thank you all. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We are about to begin our panel 2 discussion, the service provider views on the best practice principles. I have the great pleasure to welcome Caroline Eskett, Head of Investment Stewardship and Co-Head of Sustainable Ownership at Railpen, who is also, of course, an esteemed member of the BPOC. Thanks, Caroline, for accepting to moderate this panel discussion today. And I will start moving on stage now our esteemed panelists, Bruce Duguid, Head of Stewardship at EOS. Welcome, Bruce. Nicole Garzon-Mitchell, Chief Legal Officer and Senior Vice President Corporate Development at Glass Lewis. Welcome, Nicole. Paul Hunter, CEO at PERC. Welcome, Paul. Robert Gerritsen, Vice President at ISS. Welcome, Robert, on stage. And of course, last but not least, Sarah Wilson, Founder and CEO Minerva Analytics. Welcome, Sarah. Excellent. I think everyone is here. Thank you all again for accepting our invitation. Caroline, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Konstantinos, and welcome everyone. Konstantinos very kindly introduced us all. Yes, I'm the newest investor member of the Oversight Committee, and for the avoidance of doubt, we do use proxy advisors. We are the in-house asset manager for the railways pension schemes. We do the vast majority of our voting in-house. We manage the vast majority of our investments in-house, and we use proxy advisors. We use a few of them as an input into our own research and our own conversations. And we've got this very esteemed panel of service providers who will be talking to us their perspectives on what is a very noisy environment at the moment, as well as their thoughts on the best practice principles, how they're doing and how they might be able to evolve. And I'm sure that we'll have lots of questions from the audience. If you have a question, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom, as has been said previously. And the thing that I should note is that we will answer as many questions as we can, but some participants won't be able to answer any questions from the audience if they pertain to a legal process which they are currently going through. And I'm sure you will all be very understanding of that particular perspective. So the opening question to this panel. You have heard other industry participants give their view of your sector. This is your chance to reflect and respond on one theme, one point that was made in one of the earlier sessions. And top of my computer screen here is Bruce. Something that really resonated for you from some of the previous panels and discussions today.
Thank you very much, Caroline, and very good to join everybody today. I think the thing that really strikes me is looking at Anna's report, going through the different statements that have been made by the different participants, the signatories to the best practice principles. It's just the professionalism that goes into this work. There's a lot of work behind the scenes to read through the reports that we file and the details of our services, and to hold those up to scrutiny against the principles and ensure that we are doing what we say we're going to do. And I think that's a testimony to the professionalism that there is in the industry. And I think perhaps what we haven't done is communicate that well enough. And if there's what I think that came out on the panel, Daniel made the point, and a couple of others, that perhaps we need to communicate more the work that goes on behind the scenes to ensure that we're doing a robust job on behalf of our clients.
Absolutely, Bruce. And certainly a large part of the conversations we as an investor have with our portfolio companies is a little bit of that myth busting around how we use proxy advisors. So maybe there's more that can be done. We can discuss further tactics for that in due course. Thank you, Bruce. Nicole, over to you, and you're unmuted, so that works perfectly.
Yes, thank you, Caroline, and thanks again for having me here on this panel. For me, what resonated the most is the fact that we've been around for about 5.5 years now, and still folks don't know what the BPPG is. And that for me is just very difficult to understand, because we have done our job as not only the BPPG, I mean, Konstantinos, who's on the panel, he has done a tremendous amount of work, as well as the IOC, as well as everyone on this panel, to try to communicate to the market that this self-regulatory body with an independent oversight committee exists, and the fact that folks still don't know of its existence, or that still have or pushing towards additional regulation when we do have something that is working, is just mind-blowing to me. So that, to me, was the biggest takeaway.
Thank you, Nicola. And if I could just come back on that, do you agree with, I think it was Jennifer who first made the point, that it feels like it might be better known in Europe and less well known in the States and Canada and so on? Or do you think it's
I think that is the
issue?
perception, and I think because it started mostly in Europe as a response to ESMA, that's the perception. But I would highlight that the SEC actually did refer back to the BPPG in one of its rulemaking. So it isn't that they don't know about it, but I don't know if it's because they're choosing to ignore it, or they just don't pay too much attention and forget about it. It could be a combination of all of the above.
Thank you. And, of course, the Oversight Committee as well is drawn deliberately from across the different bits of the ecosystem, as well as different bits of the world, just to sort of try to ensure that we're hitting all bases. But they are points really well made. I can see Konstantinos nodding enthusiastically as people are saying various things. Paul, you are next on my screen.
Yes, I would echo those comments, both in terms of the industry's commitment to the principles, which was shown in the first set of slides from Alia. I think that came through quite clearly in terms of year in, year out, adhering to those principles, and also seeking to continuously improve our disclosures in order to make it very clear that we take those principles seriously, and just in terms of disclosure, but actually doing the work behind that disclosure as well. And yeah, secondly, in terms of awareness raising, I think that's a critical point. If awareness is not where it could be, I think it would be incredibly important, especially given the current environment and where we potentially could be headed, that it's quite clear that there are principles. There is an oversight committee which reviews and oversees and ensures that those principles are being met, and that there is a clear process around the model of self-regulation. So I think that's incredibly important message for us perhaps to take away as well.
Thank you, Paul. Sarah.
Thanks, Caroline. Yeah, just to add to what my colleagues have said earlier, I think it's the contrast between the complexities of the market structures and the evidence-driven approach that we as service providers and our clients take to the thoughtful exercise of voting, versus the very simplistic and often vacuous allegations that are actually made. They're serious, don't get me wrong. I call them vacuous because they're empty. And we've proven that over the years. And maybe that is why there is a lack of engagement. Because actually what it comes down to is there are a few advisors, lobby organisations, aggrieved CEOs who didn't get the LTIP that they wanted, making a lot of noise, drowning out the fact that the majority of the clients, the majority of the issuers understand that voting is complicated. People need tools and services, just like they do in any other part of the investment process. We always did this kind of reporting to our clients. We just didn't make it public because the public don't pay us, our clients pay us. So from that perspective, yeah, we're happy to, sunshine is the best disinfectant and the electric light is the best policeman. Happy to prove what we always said we did. Now the question arises is, why do people not seem to believe it when we say it?
Thank you, Sarah. And large parts of what you said seem to resonate with, I think, a wider conversation that's going on in the wider investment community at the moment, which is that generally issuers are talking very loudly about their concerns. And we have some wonderful investor membership associations who are making the case for an effectively functioning voting ecosystem, strong shareholder rights and everything else. And yet somehow that investor perspective is not being heard. And I think that is the case. And I'm pleased to see you all nodding, Sarah, as I'm talking about this. I think that is the case across the piece, as well as on voting and the use of proxy advisors.
Definitely.
Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline, and thanks to the entire Oversight Committee again for organizing this forum. But what resonated most for me is both in Jen's and Anna's presentation on the BPPG and the principles and the reporting not being static and ever evolving. And I think we come from a long way since 2013 to today, where we are in terms of the compliance statements. I think the professionalism and the information that we provide in the documents, and just the transparency in terms of the quality that we provide, how we manage potential conflicts of interest, how we communicate with the market. I think from where we come and where we need to go is ever evolving, and that really resonated with me, not being static. And I particularly think that the governance around the best practice principles and the oversight committee and sort of the continuous feedback loop is really helping the legitimacy of this effort, and sort of allowing us to ever evolve and sort of progress on disclosure.
Thank you very much. And maybe it's helpful adding in here that certainly we, and I know others do, I haven't just been reading the statements since joining the Oversight Committee or since sort of getting more involved in this group generally, but actually when it comes to thinking about our service providers, current service providers, potential service providers, we always review these statements, and it really helps us definitely more and more over time as they've evolved, get an insight into what you're doing and how you're thinking about various things and living up to those principles. So quite a few of you have spoken about the evolution of the best practice principles and of the reporting. Of course, we had that wonderful presentation from Anna earlier. I think what might be quite useful to help bring this to life for some members of our audience, maybe those who are a bit less familiar with the work, if you could just very briefly give an insight into how best practice principles have helped you develop and evolve your reporting over time. There's an awful lot of engagement between Oversight Committee and the group in terms of taking that forward. How have you found the principles, the structure, the approach? How have you found that they've enabled you to improve your reporting over time? And Nicole, you are unmuted, which means that I think I'm going to go to you first for that.
Great, no problem. Thank you, Caroline. So I think for us, the BPP reporting has become a really important part of how we demonstrate our commitment to transparency, accountability, and continuous improvement. In the past, we had all these things. We had our methodologies publicly available. We had our conflict of interest policies and procedures. But I think what has helped us has been to create a central location for all of these things. So our BPP statement of compliance has actually become a central repository for all of our policies and operations, and we use it quite extensively. We share it with clients, we share it with new employees. We always say, welcome to Glass Lewis. Do you want to know about our business, what we do, how we operate? Here's our statement of compliance. So for us, it's been very helpful in that way, but it's also been helpful in taking a step back and pushing us to constantly evaluate our policies and procedures. And so a couple of things that have come out for us as part of the reporting these past few years, for example, have been expanding our diversity reporting and then also establishing our feedback and complaint center on our website. So those are two examples that I think have helped us improve. And we continuously, look at the principles, look at those annual reports with the feedback that we get from the IOC, and then try to see how we could improve even further on that transparency in regards to our compliance with the principles.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And of course, that is the perfect example of, it's the reporting but ultimately potentially leads to sort of some additional changes in terms of practice too, which is fabulous. And it's great to hear that you give it to all your new employees as well. Paul, you were looking particularly thoughtful as Nicole was talking. We're going to go to you next.
I'm going to scratch my chin.
No one's allowed to make any facial expressions, otherwise they're going to be picked on next.
But yeah, I think likewise. I think with any reporting structures, it's not just about the report; it's about the process that goes into it. And you speak to other investors on things like TCFD reporting, and they say it's not just about the output; it's actually the process that goes into it that is beneficial. And that's certainly the way that we approach it, as a way to take stock in terms of what we do, give us the opportunity to reflect in terms of our practices. And I would also say, the feedback, the detailed feedback we get from the Oversight Committee is particularly useful. I mean, contrasting that, with this is a criticism of the UK Stewardship Code reporting, because obviously they're dealing with a lot more reports to go through. But once you pass that first year, the level and of detail in terms of feedback is less, and to the point of you either pass or fail. So I think that's particularly helpful in that regard. And I also think it's important when you go through this process. So for this year, I mean, for example, we've added some additional information on AI, which was mentioned earlier, which is disclosed, which we obviously disclose to our clients, but I think it's also important to disclose more broadly. So that provides, again, the opportunity for us to, be fully transparent about use of new technology as well. So, I mean, we have. I'm relatively new to the post, so only a year in, but I was very much committed to making sure that our report was demonstrated our commitment to the principles, and hopefully that is the case. So I can't comment too much on how it's evolved over time, but certainly we've sought to address those areas where the Oversight Committee felt that we could go further, and have done so on the issues around vote rationale and on staffing as well.
Thank you. And actually, maybe it's worthwhile just highlighting that feedback point, that detailed feedback point that you made. So we have a saying at Railpen that feedback is a gift. And this was my first year on the Oversight Committee, as I've said previously, and to see sort of the detailed feedback that was being given and the time and care and attention. And as you say, sort of it's like the first year, this is something I've gone through myself, the first year producing your stewardship report. Yeah, that's sort of very detailed line by line feedback, and just really, I can say this because I wasn't on the group that did this, but my hat's off to the people who took that time. Obviously, I looked at it and reviewed it, but the people who spent all the time sort of giving the detailed feedback, it's incredible. And I think a really good example of the community, the industry working together with the professionalism, as I think Bruce and a few others have mentioned previously, of this piece of work. Sarah, you are unmuted.
Thank you so much. So I'm feeling very old now because, of course, I'm one of the original people who was in the room when it was all being put together now. So I'm going to just go and check the grey hairs. So we always had an ISO 9001 quality management system. So we already had that central repository, but it was really an inside job, as it were. It was a document that didn't really get to see the light of day. So what the principles has done has given us the opportunity to then communicate more widely the commitment that we have to quality, accuracy, objectivity, and independence. And to your sort of point about sort of feedback, yes, feed being the operative word, and the point about feedback is to nourish the process. So yeah, it's actually saying, yeah, we do these things. We've always been committed to quality. Here's how we prove it. Now, what more do you want to know? And I think that in terms of the market dynamic that we have got, which is slightly lopsided in terms of market size, it enables us to sort of go out there on a more level playing field to actually say, yep, we have all of the policies, we have all the procedures, we can prove it, and here we did it. And I think that's actually sort of critically important. And I just share the frustration with other signatories that we do go to an awful lot of trouble. So many people contribute, and it's disappointing when people don't provide feedback, because even if people criticised it, that means they've read it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you, Robert, and then Bruce.
Yeah, sure. I think I need to echo the other panelists. I think the Oversight Committee has a very important function in sort of bringing the feedback to the members and about the compliance statements. I think over the years, increasingly we got the feedback to be more specific, provide case studies, provide screenshots. I think we have done that over the years to be more specific, because of course you start off very principle based. This becomes very specific in terms of, like I mentioned, case studies, specific screenshots in terms of what our clients can see, and provide really the insight in terms of what is going on behind the scenes and how the mechanics look like. So I think that level of transparency has also increased, apart from implementing a lot of principles.
Thank you, Robert. And Bruce, and we've had a couple of questions through the chat. Please do continue to pull them through as well. We want to get lots of questions from the audience. Bruce, finish us off on this one.
Well, I'd echo the point that bringing everything under one roof is a good thing for us to do. It's good for our clients, I think. For example, our conflicts of interest policy might be separately disclosed to some of the voting policies and then the service quality data, but that's all brought together in one place. And I think what the committee, what the Oversight Committee has done is help us to continuously improve by providing that kind of second level of audit and assurance, if you like, of what is best practice. So I think this raises us all up to a highest common denominator. A couple of areas where that's happened have been, we've been asked to give a bit more information on how our team is structured, and how we have different forms of structure by geography, which drives a lot of governance, but also by theme and sector, because some of the votes need to be nuanced in those different ways, and also training of the team. Another area has been how we communicate and linking together not only the formal communication of votes to our clients and to issuers, but how we actually communicate the summary of the season in public reporting as well. And I think we've also been helped in just articulating upgrades to our research process. So our policies have a set of different indicators that we take into account. They don't quite explain how we mix them together, how we use quantitative and qualitative factors and insights into engagement through our engagement service. And so bringing that together, you wouldn't quite get the picture if you just looked at our policies, for example. So it's a bit more of a narrative on how it really works.
Thank you. And of course, a reminder for people watching that you can see for yourselves. As Anna noted, we've got all the different statements over time still on the website. You can see for yourselves how the reporting has evolved too. So do go and sort of unpack that a bit more if you'd like to. We have had 2 questions in the Q&A so far, but they're on a similar theme, and that is US versus UK, the US political situation. So I'm going to sort of try to wrap them both in together, but they are slightly distinct. So the first is, why are proxy advisors seemingly being targeted much more in the US compared to some other regions like Europe and the UK? And focusing in on the US, are the panelists expecting the campaign against proxy advisors in the US, particularly in certain states, to continue for the long term? And do they think that if Democrats achieve a little bit more electoral success, so for instance, in next year's midterms, that might trigger a shift in momentum on this issue? So again, I will remind the audience that there are currently some sensitive legal processes going on, but setting that aside, interested in whoever might wish to go first to sort of start unpacking a little bit of this. And Paul, you have unmuted as I said that.
I'll have a go at this one. Brave. I mean, I think it's probably a reflection. I mean, it's a political driven pushback against proxy advisors, and I would, from my perspective, it would appear that issues around things like climate change, which are much more contested in the US, much less contested as issues in the UK and Europe. And I mean, you can just look at that in terms of things like being inside or outside of the Paris Agreement, depending on the presidency in the US versus similar positions, changes in governments in UK and EU countries. So I think that is probably you can probably also apply that in terms of issues around diversity as well, where there's lots more consensus on the issue. So, in terms of proxy advisors providing, increasingly driven by our clients, wanting and needing to provide advice and insights on how those risks are being managed, and means that we are providing that to our clients on their request, which obviously is completely counter to some people's view of the world. So I think there's an element of that comes into play, and we effectively get caught up in it. I think there's probably I would say that there's I don't think CEOs or directors will not like being voted against where our advice recommends that, and I think that probably equally applies in the UK as it does in the US. So I think that's probably not an argument necessarily, and I think in terms of that question about Texas and midterms, I'm guessing it depends on where those midterm results land, and we know where some of the anti-ESG pushback has come from in terms of states, and I'm no expert in US politics, but I should imagine they're unlikely to change hands in terms of who controls some of those state legislatures. So I'm not optimistic that we'll be out of the woods come US midterms.
Thank you, Paul. And you said that you're no expert in the States, but I thought that was a pretty cogent. Someone else who's not an expert in the US political situation, that sounded like a pretty cogent explanation to me. But would maybe someone from one of the big American... No, Sarah, you next, and then we'll go to others who might be closer to the US political situation. I'm going to go after you.
I'm going to bring some of my grey hairs back in again and go and kind of roll back to how this all started, because I think otherwise history is doomed to repeat itself. Before the global financial crisis, there was no discussion about the role of proxy voting services. The term proxy advisor didn't even exist. We always called ourselves a proxy voting agency and still do. And it started out because of the discussions that the SEC were initiating around proxy plumbing, around making the whole process much more hygienic, so that people could vote their shares, so that issuers and shareholders could actually have better relationships with one another. And we saw lobby organizations like the Chamber of Commerce and the Business Roundtable starting to wade in, Dodd-Frank, Say on Pay, and we became a bogeyman. There was also another thread, which was the role of private equity markets, who suddenly found that people were reluctant to leave the cozy confines of being owned by a private equity consortium to going public, because there was going to be public scrutiny about exec comp. So you can actually trace a lot of the arguments, because often the critics, oh, you've used the wrong peer group to analyze our pay, etc. So when you actually disassemble and pick apart a lot of the arguments, some of those are still running through. So we have stock exchanges who get very bent out of shape about the lack of IPOs. And so consequently, they are reducing one share, one vote, because they believe that you as shareholders are somehow going to be so misguided that you're not going to let company X, Y, or Z do what they need to do, because the great founder must be allowed to do what they have to do. So am I confident? I'm no more confident than I think than anybody else on this that it's going to change, because it is now so ideologically woven into some political organizations. I never thought that proxy advisors would be on something like the presidential, on the Resolute desk. Yet the Heritage Foundation found room for proxy advisors. I mean, it's waffle, but there it is. We're just going to have to deal with it. And we definitely saw leakage from the US lobbying into Europe. So around shareholder rights 1, shareholder rights 2, there was that transatlantic lobbying. But Europe, I think, has settled and has come to terms and understands that it's not all one size fits all. Shareholders have a voice. And at the end of the day, this is also very insulting about shareholders who daily move billions around the markets, and somehow you become drooling idiots when it comes to shareholder voting. That doesn't stack up. So the logic is just not there. But and as we now know, in the political environment we're dealing with in the US and in Europe, logic has gone out the window. So it's going to be a difficult few years.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, so many conversations that I have with new companies that we haven't engaged with before, and they're like, but of course you just spoke with the proxy advisors, don't you? No, that's really not how it works. And it does, to me, certainly feel like proxy advisors are quite a useful scapegoat. Whereas it's really the investors they should be getting concerned with. Nicole, you wanted to go next?
Yes, I'm happy to. As the only American here on the panel, and dealing with these issues on a day-to-day basis as part of my day job, I do have some strong opinions on all of this. I think political pressure is definitely plays a role in this. But I also think that the market and the role that proxy advisors play has evolved. I mean, I've been at Glass Lewis for 21 years now. So Sarah, I'm not as long as you, but quite some time. And I remember, in the past, there was the, conception that clients would come, they'd pick the policy, all that. That's changed significantly in the last couple decades. A majority of at least Glass Lewis's clients are custom policy voting clients. And so what that means is they actually have their own perspectives and their views. They implement their own custom policy, and the recommendations that they get are based on their own policy. So I think the issue is, one, there's a misconception that things are still being run the way they used to be, potentially in the past when proxy advisors first started. Secondly, the fact that we are seen as having a lot of influence, and that ties into that. I think Paul pointed out that, as long as we continue to vote against directors and their compensation, we're still going to be not the best or the favorite person in the room for doing so. But I think that the onus is on our shareholder clients, because they are the ones who are actually casting those votes, right, based on their own policies. And so I think there is a shift, at least I'm seeing that here in the US, in terms of trying to change that narrative. And someone once told me, when you go into talk to politicians, or anyone for that matter, they don't really get the message or hear it until you've repeated it at least 20 times. And so that's been my experience. I've met with regulators, policymakers, and I've reiterated this over and over and over again. And it doesn't really resonate until you've done that for a dozen or so times. So I think we just need to continue to rephrase the way that we act as service providers, and explain that there is no robo voting. Clients have their own custom policies. We really don't have as much influence as they think we do. And there are key differences that have evolved throughout the last 20 or so years. So I think that's what I would indicate. In terms of whether I think there'll be a change or not, if there's a change of administration, or the pressure has always been there. It's been heightened right now, but let's take it back to when Biden was in administration, we still had this. So I don't think that it's going to necessarily get worse or less. I just think, again, we need to work together to change that narrative so that we can shift the onus on our institutional investor clients, because ultimately they're the ones who actually own the vote.
Thank you, Nicola. And before I go to Robert and Bruce for anything they want to add to this, sort of my sense actually is that on a whole host of issues, I think policymakers, possibly from all parties, just they don't have a financial services or investment background. I think they find it hard to understand how investors think, act, what the investing ecosystem looks like. I think they find that harder than thinking about companies and companies shackled by corporate governance issues and beholden to their shareholders or their proxy advisors or so on. So I think it is intuitively simpler for them to hear, oh, maybe dual class share structures are what's holding companies back, or maybe it's proxy advisors what holding companies back because it's got issue, because they are influencing the investors on exec pay and all these other kinds of things. I think it's just simpler for them. So that piece around awareness raising and framing it and education, I think for me really resonates on this, but I think across the piece and looking at the current economic challenges we're facing, I can understand why policymakers are trying to look for the simple shortcuts to achieving economic growth, whatever sounds like it might do that. Sarah, you've got your hand up, so a quick reflection for you before I go to Bruce and Robert, who've now changed around on my screen beautifully.
Actually, it's more of a question, Caroline, which is, obviously, we as an organisation don't do engagement. Our clients have asked us not to do that. And so therefore, I'm wondering, where do boards get these ideas from? Who is telling them these tall stories? And what evidence is being put forward? Because, there is a massive unregulated ecosystem of advisors to boards that shareholders never get to see the research that they're providing or the advice that they get given. You don't get to fact check it, see the quality. Remuneration consultants did a little bit of work on that. But there's a whole panoply of advisors out there. When I think about the disclosures that we all make as compared with other actors in financial services, I don't see fund managers or sell-side analysts providing half as much information about their processes as we all do. So I think that's got to be a question that regulators should be asking is, where are these stories cooked up?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. Robert or Bruce, anything to add to that or on the rest of the conversation? Robert?
No, I was just thinking and going back to the question around on politics. I just didn't want to make any political speculation. I know Konstantinos is recording this session, so that's very dangerous here. But I just think, and that's what we're seeing, is the operating environment is changing, not only for us, but also for our clients, and that brings a lot of uncertainty. And in situations of uncertainty, I think the only recipe is increasing your disclosure, telling your story, and making sure you have the agility to adjust if that is needed. And I think we just need to focus on continuing to help our clients with their stewardship responsibilities and provide them the independent research and sort of the tools to help them in sort of their activities and sort of their voting activities. And so we get these discussions, of course, and the good part of it is it allows, and that's the silver lining, it allows that a lot of facts are being brought into the discussion, and that's of course very helpful. But I think it's really about not losing sight of what we're really aiming to do as an industry, which is helping our clients execute those stewardship responsibilities and being agile in this sort of uncertain environment.
Nicely said, Robert. Thank you. And Bruce?
I don't have too much to add, but I think Sarah's right that there has been a sort of somewhat more settled view in Europe. I think partly through the processes of SRD, Shareholder Rights Directive 1 and 2. And I think that it's a constant challenge to communicate. That sort of plumbing analogy, it is complicated. Interestingly, I think that
proxy service providers actually enable a diversity of views, because you can have lots of different custom policies based on a backbone of common research, which is the expensive part. And so explaining how the diversity manifests itself against an apparent sort of industry that seems limited in its competition in some way is probably a very good thing to do. And I think that would explain how the industry works.
Thank you. So we've sort of finished this bit of the question. Again, I encourage people to feed through any more questions they might have in the Q&A, because we don't have any more at the moment. You know, we finished this particular question talking about what more we can do as an industry to, or who should be doing it as well, to reframe, to communicate, to raise awareness. And that was something that came out in some of the earlier conversation that we've been having around whether or not Best Practice Principles Group, the oversight, could be doing more to communicate about its work and about the approach that we're taking, the professionalism and the dedication and the feedback and so on. So that, you know, is something that maybe could work better. We've spoken about feedback as something that works well in terms of how the process is currently going. What more, given the noisy environment, do you think the Best Practice Principles Group, the principals, the Oversight Committee could be doing beyond what we've already discussed to try to carve a way forward? Bruce, that was a very definite nod.
I'll just maybe build on the point about I think it's one of the themes of this panel is explaining more transparently how the industry works, but explaining, for example, that the many different custom policies that clients will have, and the many ways in which clients can therefore differ in their views, I think is an important job to do. I think we're going to have all sorts of parallels to make to other areas of finance where there's advice given, but it's the decision maker that really makes the decision, and so that will be important to kind of shine light on the industry. It's not an industry that many people focus a lot of time on, and so the education of the whole structure is going to take its time. And I just think that there's always going to be challenges with changes in politicians and office holders in every jurisdiction. The job's never really done. That there'll always be new teams to kind of educate and bring up to speed, and that will be our challenge. And I think the BPPG really helps to do that. The website's already got a lot of information, and things are brought together under one roof, as we've been saying, but we still need to go out there and do the advocacy as well.
Thank you, Bruce. Nicole.
I'd piggyback off of that, and I'd also actually say that the IOC and Konstantinos in particular have done an excellent job at really trying to engage and explain to regulators and key NGOs what we do, but there is no permanent staff at the BPPG, so there's just so much they can do, and I would encourage to actually invite, you know, groups like CII, ICGN, even other groups like the NACD to kind of carry out the message and have additional panels to communicate this to members. I do a lot of speaking engagements on this topic, and you'd be surprised at how many times I have sitting in front of a group of directors and they barely even know what a proxy advisor is. And that's pretty embarrassing. So, obviously sometimes it's smaller mid-cap companies, but still the fact that they're not as familiar with what we do, how we are all very different. I think what I like about the BPPG is the flexibility that it affords its members. As Sarah pointed out, we all have very different business models and we all do things very differently. And the way the BPPG framework is structured, it allows us to report based on those business models. If we had a more robust regulatory framework, it would be hard and it would be an additional barrier to entry, even bigger than what we have now, just because it's hard to be in this business. But I would encourage, again, our institutional investor clients to kind of speak up. The reality is that if we go away, they're going to have to do it themselves, and it's a lot of work and they probably don't want to do that. So I would encourage them to just explain the value, how they work with us, and how ultimately we're just a service provider helping them execute those votes. We're not really influencing anything, but just being a tool for them to be able to effectively carry out their fiduciary duties.
Yeah, I like that. And I like that piece around the oversight committee and the group and so on, working with other organisations to try to spread the word. And obviously we had ICGN opening, which is great. ICI had a panel on this recently, Investor Forum, and I think someone from the Investor Forum is attending today as well. I think Konstantinos is going to be going and speaking at that as well. So I agree, if we can all sort of pull together to try to articulate this over and over again as policymakers and so on change, that would be a good thing. Now, we've actually got 3 different questions that have come through from the audience, so and only 5 minutes left. So does anyone have anything burning they'd like to add to what Bruce and Nicole said, or can I move to another question?
Go for it, Caroline.
Great. Let's have a look. So, what is your most significant proxy advisory related concern for the next year? We've got 2 more to get through, so can you give that in 1 sentence?
Regulators not making their mind up what regulations should be and stopping forever changing them.
Perfect, Sarah. Setting the model. Paul, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I would say regulation of a bad sort, I think would be the highest on my concern list.
Thank you. Robert?
Yeah, next to the regulatory front, I also think the increasing divergence in views globally on the elements that we provide our services on, that I think is increasingly a challenge to.
Brilliant, thank you. Nicole?
All of the above. I agree with everything my panelists have said. Yeah.
Brilliant. Bruce?
Yeah, I agree as well. I think we're getting a lot of interest in pass-through voting, but that's an implementation challenge, but one that we're very pleased to help clients with. And I think that AI will play a role increasingly, and we'll have to make sure that it does so in a way that is really additive to the industry and doesn't in any way cause more questions.
Brilliant, thank you. That's maybe a nice segue to the next question that we've had, which is the regulatory environment for investors has also changed a lot over the last few years, and I was thinking about path-through voting, sort of other developments. Have your services evolved in response? I'm going to add a little bit on to that, which says, and if so, how?
Yes, all the time. I think that's in everybody's statement makes it very clear. Everybody is committed to quality feedback and recirculating that through everything that we do. I mean, we were doing pass-through voting actually in 1996, which again, I'm showing all of my grey hair. So it's kind of like nice to go back to the future, as it were. But I think that people don't realize there is a long lead time in having to make developments. And this ties into the first question about policymakers not understanding. We have massive technology systems. Those need to be recoded, reprogrammed. You have to retrain staff. And it's not so easy as suddenly, oh, well, here's a new regulation. Here it is. And issuer disclosures are not getting any better. So what's the biggest change that we've seen is in 1996, we used to be able to get annual reports and accounts through a letterbox without too much difficulty. Now, a remuneration report is as long or longer than the annual reports we used to get. Yeah. So we are parsing an awful lot more. Issuers are not doing anything to help that. They're not using tagging, for example. So they complain about errors in research reports. But then you have a designer who thinks it's a great idea to put a complex remuneration table over a page fold so that somebody has to keep flipping backwards and forwards. So, there are practical logistical issues that we deal with every day. And somebody said, oh, well, if we're not here, the fund managers are going to have to do it for themselves. You don't want to, seriously. It's really hard work. You need special types of geeks who know how to do this stuff.
Thank you. And for those of you who are interested in UK policy developments, we've got a non-financial reporting review sort of underway. And whilst obviously you don't want the baby to be thrown out with the bathwater, definitely as someone who reads an awful lot of annual reports myself every year, definitely things that could be streamlined that are not meaningful for investors. particularly around executive pay stuff. But brilliant, thank you. Anyone else want to add something to that? We've got one last question to do. By the way, Konstantinos, with apologies to everyone for their comfort breaks, has said that we can take a few minutes from the comfort break if we need to, so we've got a bit more time. Bruce, Nicole?
I guess I just add to what Sarah said. There are a lot of regulatory changes for our clients as well. So for example, in Europe, we've seen a lot of push toward additional stewardship and engagement. And so at least at Glass Lewis, we've expanded our stewardship services products. We acquired a company with the technology platform to allow institutional investors to track their engagements, things like that. As Bruce pointed out, we also offer pass-through voting. And so, yes, we actually take feedback from the regulatory environment, not only from the investor side, but also from the issuer side, and then try to improve our products and services so that they accurately reflect the changes in the regulatory environment.
Brilliant, thank you. And so this last question, I'll go to Bruce, Paul, and Robert in the first instance for this. It was mentioned that policymakers don't understand proxy advisors, and I think the investment sector generally. What are the top 1 to 3 items they should know? If you were in a meeting with Rachel Reeves or someone very senior tomorrow, what is the key thing that they should know? Bruce, you've unmuted.
Yeah, I think firstly that we're an advisor, and so it's the investors who are the clients who decide, and that there are a variety of ways they can do that, including through their own custom policies. And I think just the scale of the operation that is required and how it would be difficult to imagine another solution working without an enormous cost being imposed on the industry.
Brilliant. Thank you. Robert.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize the variety in investor profiles and investor prospects and different views and philosophies that investors have, and that we're aiming to sort of serve and cater that demand rather than that we push an agenda. And I think that's often not well understood in terms of how we provide our services. And I think it's a very relevant statistic that, and I think Georgina mentioned this already last year at the same forum, that over 90% of the votes that are processed on our platform on behalf of our clients is linked to a customized voting policy. And those customized voting policies are linked to the individual perspectives and views of our clients. And that's often misunderstood. And I think it plays a much larger role than is being portrayed with regulators.
Thank you. Paul, last words from you.
Yeah.
Good.
No pressure. Just a couple of points. I would say the client is in control. Not only are they in control, but they are in control of whether they commission us or not. They don't have to. It's completely up to them. And secondly, I would say for them to consider a kind of market-wide risk if we did not exist. What place, in terms of good stewardship, would that mean, and what implications would that mean in terms of significant market-wide risk from a lack of good stewardship?
Brilliant, thank you. Nicole and Sarah, there you go. Last words from them instead.
I think robo-voting. I would want to focus on robo-voting because there's a huge misconception that clients cast their votes within 48 hours of our research reports being released, and that's just not true. We gave data to a group of academics a while ago, and they created a very thorough and thoughtful report where that myth is demystified. My other thing there would be, I think, the misconception of the robo-voting. I think they don't understand that what happens is investors actually have their custom policies. They pre-populate those ballots, and then those get automatically voting. But that's no different than when I put my pre-order on DoorDash for dinner tonight, and I do it now because I have the time, as opposed to actually putting in my order half an hour before dinner time. So I'd like to be able to explain that difference and the misconception around what they call robo-voting.
Perfect. Thank you, Nicole. And Sarah.
3 things. Number 1, fix the plumbing so that client votes can pass through a hygienic system. Number two, correlation is not causation. We do the things our clients ask us to do, and we do it well, and that's why there appears to be alignment. But you can't say that 90% of the votes are suddenly wrong or right or whatever. It's the same research process that is driving the recommendations that are in favour. And really look at the evidence, look at real evidence, not made up evidence. There are things that pass for evidence. And there's, I keep saying my tiny violin factory has burned down because there are squeaky wheel regulators, squeaky wheel lobbyists who are just going out repeating the same old claptrap all the time. And it is just not backed by fact. Yeah, I think I would just say to the regulators, you actually need to sit down and understand our analysts collectively as an industry are very, very good and thorough at what they do. They do a very thankless task. Nobody wants to work in proxy season in the middle of April. Really, we don't. So listen, and there is nothing that we will not tell you if you really want to know what goes on inside. And I challenge anybody to come and work in a proxy advisor during April. No regulator has ever offered to do that, and I don't know why.
I think we have some regulators on the call. So there you go. That is an open offer to you. If you're feeling underemployed next April, Sarah's got a job for you. And with that, thank you all very much to our wonderful panelists for all their insights, but also to the fantastic audience for being so engaged, asking so many fantastic questions. Thank you all. Konstantinos, back to you.
And thanks also from me, Caroline, and our esteemed panelists. Stay where you are as I'm moving you off stage. And apologies to Robert because I keep on recording every year. Yes, because it is part of our mission to then share with the public our events. It is in our protocol, so I do apologize for that, but I'm sure that people will also enjoy the opportunity to follow everything on YouTube afterwards. We did have more than 100 registrations for today's event, but for reasons apparently, other commitments, people keep on emailing me during the event by saying that, please make sure that the recording is made available. So we tick that box as well, which I think is important for our audience. And of course, also thanks from me to our engaged audience for their very insightful questions. As I'm moving our panelists off stage, while thanking them again, I will now turn gradually to our next keynote speaker, Nell Minow, Chair Value Edge Advisors. We are truly, truly grateful to Nell for having accepted our invitation to provide this keynote today. I will move her on stage in a second. And of course, I'm sure that everyone has been waiting for this particular keynote in light of the current US situation in the area of service providers. So Nell is joining us on stage in a couple of seconds. Perfect. Nell, welcome to the BPP OC Forum, to its 5th edition. We are really grateful for your participation. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And thanks to everyone for being here. I really enjoyed that last panel and learned a lot. And of course, agree with everything everyone said. I actually have my gray hair, so I have been doing this for quite a long time. I started in this field in 1986. And I'm going to go back and talk about that a little bit in a minute. But first, I want to sort of lead off with where we are. To me, the most important statement from the last panel is what Caroline said: feedback is a gift. And that applies whether you're talking about a family, an office, a politician, or a corporation. Feedback is a gift. Everybody does better if you have honest communication and you are challenged constantly about your assumptions. And yet somehow we are living in a country right now in the United States where there are efforts across the board to cut off any kind of feedback. And so what the attacks that you've just heard about, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit on proxy advisors, is just one small part of a very widespread effort. And I think it's fair to say that if we study history, the efforts in the past to cut off honest communication, honest challenges have never worked out well. And that's the reason that the First Amendment here in the United States is to guarantee freedom of speech. And that is also the reason it's under threat right now, because people who want to be autocrats, people who want to be dictators, don't allow that. So we're living in an emperor's new clothes moment here, just waiting for the people to say that the emperor has got no clothes. So yes, we talked a moment ago in the panel about Texas, and as you know, that new law is on hold at the moment. The judge seemed very skeptical about it, which was encouraging. He was a Bush appointee. He was not a flaming liberal by any means. So I thought that was good. I personally have testified twice in Congress, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit, on the attacks on proxy advisors so far this year. The SEC is pushing back on proxy advisors and on shareholder proposals and on shareholder rights in other categories. Very troubling to me. The SEC has just approved a proposal by ExxonMobil, which means other companies are going to follow suit, saying that ExxonMobil can come to the shareholders and say, trust us, let us take this burden of proxy voting away from you. Let us vote your proxies as we see fit. And if you say yes once, you never have to bother about it again, because we will continue to vote for you forever. I think that's tremendously dangerous. It's being challenged already. Again, a follow-on to one of the comments from the last panel that I find very troubling. The shareholders, a majority of the shareholders voted no on a director at the Wiley company. I know that you've probably got a little Wiley books there behind you, because they publish all the law books. And so the shareholders voted no. I presume the proxy advisors recommended a vote against that director. He tendered his resignation, as he's required to do under their bylaws, or their policies, I guess I should say. And the board refused to accept his resignation, so he will continue to serve. That's troubling for a lot of reasons. Now, I would argue, I've not been able to persuade anybody about this yet, but I think I will, that if the business judgment rule, which protects boards of directors, is predicated on the idea that the shareholders have delegated their authority to the board, then the fact that the shareholders have majority voted against a particular director should not give him, or in fact the board then continues to include him, that deference. But we'll see whether any judge will pick up on that. What I want to really emphasize, though, in the story of the Wiley board is that the company has got to explain why they've made this decision. And what was their explanation? Oh, that was just the proxy advisors. We don't have to listen to them. And of course, that is deeply troubling on a number of counts. One, it's completely non-substantive. They refuse to engage in any concerns that the shareholders might have about this director. Two, what does the fact that it's proxy advisors have to do with anything? As we emphasized over and over on that last board, the client makes the final decision. And, the shareholders are stupid argument is very, very troubling. Shareholders are sheep, shareholders are lemmings, shareholders are dumb. That's very troubling. The company should, if I were a shareholder of Wiley, I would be writing to them right now and saying, you have got to do better than that. Tell us what exactly you have to say about this director that is not consistent with what the proxy advisor said or what the shareholders are concerned about. So I want to talk for a minute about this sort of kill the messenger attitude. So as I said, I testified twice, once before a subcommittee of the House Financial Services Committee, once before a subcommittee of the House Judiciary Committee. And in both cases, I was the sole representative on behalf of proxy advisors, on behalf of shareholders, on a panel with representatives from corporations and their emissaries, so their lawyers, the academics that they sponsor, et cetera. So I want to tell you a little bit about that. I really felt like I was through the looking glass and living in opposite land, because I went to the University of Chicago Law School, which is known for its free market emphasis. And I have started several companies with Bob Monks. So I'm an entrepreneur, and I've worked for my entire career on behalf of shareholders. I'm a passionate advocate of the free market. I believe in the free market. And I thought Republicans did too, but apparently no more, because these are the things that the Republicans were concerned about. They were concerned that the most sophisticated financial professionals in the world voluntarily purchase a research service, which they sometimes agree with and sometimes don't. And that to me is the ultimate example of the free market working very efficiently. The key understanding that you have to have about shareholders is the collective choice problem. It would cost them more to become expert on some of the proxy issues than any benefit they might get from voting correctly. And that's why having an independent source of research is so important. Furthermore, a rival proxy advisory firm appeared on one of the panels and said they thought that Congress should intervene because ISS and Glass Lewis refused to deliver his product on their platform. And the Republican members of Congress all thought he was right about that. And I had to remind them that if they thought that was true, then maybe they should pass a law saying that Amazon has to deliver my packages to when I want to send them, because they're going to every house already. So why shouldn't they take my packages? I said, that's the literal definition of socialism. So I did get them to back off a little bit from that. When they argued that the proxy advisors were too powerful, on both of the hearings that I was in, I said that if that was true, corporate executives should stand up and cheer, because 96% or so of the time they recommend a vote with management. Of course, those are ordinary votes like unopposed board members and approve the auditors, because that's what most of the votes are. And to the extent that that proxy advisors are, if they are powerful, that they're recommending votes with management, you can't really do better than that. I said to Congress, the members of Congress, how often do you get a 96% vote here in Congress? It's not easy to get. You should be thrilled. And then I made the big mistake of saying, and if these people on the panel with me don't like it, they're a bunch of snowflakes, at which point I was formally chastised for my lack of decorum, which I'm very proud of. Okay. So one point, again, that I want to touch on that was raised by the panel before, and I'm sure throughout the conference, there are references to the Heritage Foundation. It's really important that every single time you mention the Heritage Foundation, you remember that they're cosplaying as a think tank, but in reality, they're just an arm of the very same corporate executives that are giving us so much trouble on getting these hearings done, getting legislation passed. The very same corporate executives are the ones that are funding the Heritage Foundation. Do not mention them without talking about who is behind them. And I recommend, if you want to see the whole list, there's a website called Source Watch. And anytime you are hearing something from one of these, what I call these fake front groups, the CEO funded fake front groups, go to Source Watch and you'll see where the money is coming from. So what happened here is that the Exxon proxy contest, where engine number one defeated some candidates put up by the board, completely freaked them all out, because the very people who love to rhapsodize about the purity of the free market go very far in the other direction when it sends them a message they don't like. And so once that happened at Exxon, all of the big companies, particularly the fossil fuel companies, got together and said, what can we do to squelch the shareholders? So having said that depressing thing, let me remind you for a minute about how far we've come. So when I first got into this business, Bob Monks, the late Bob Monks, asked me, we met when we were both working in the government in the Reagan administration. He was a political appointee. I was just a civil servant. He said, I'm starting a company that's going to give advice about corporate governance to institutional investors. And of that sentence, I was familiar with the words advice and 2. I mean, I really didn't know anything more about it. But he had had this sort of light bulb experience. He was running for office in Maine, and he went by a polluted river, and he said, who wants this? The people who live here don't want it. If you ask the shareholders, they would not want it. The government doesn't want it. Why is it happening? And he realized that the vulnerable point was him. He, as the head of a financial services firm, was voting proxies without ever thinking about the consequences. And he was aware that with the rise of pension funds and index funds, all of a sudden there were going to be shareholders who were big enough and smart enough to respond in a market efficient way. And he wanted to be a part of that and part of solving that collective choice problem. So he had a unique perspective. He'd been a CEO of an energy company. He'd been in the government. He had been in financial services. He'd been in a law firm. He really put all of that together. So that's how Institutional Shareholder Services got started. So I have kind of a Dickensian best of times, worst of times assessment about this. When we got started, the rule was the Wall Street rule: vote with management or sell the shares. And we now have institutional investors who take this very seriously, and we have resources for them. So I think that's terrific. Boards are vastly more capable and independent than they were in those days. O.J. Simpson, who was a football player and then a murderer, served on 5 boards. He was on an audit committee. He didn't know anything more about the audit committee than the other member. The other member just wasn't famous. And today we would see that as a risk factor. We would say, why doesn't the CEO want people who know what numbers look like on the audit committee? So in those days, corporate directors knew how the shareholders voted before the meeting and would call them up and argue with them about it. Institutional investors didn't have to disclose their votes. So we've made a lot of progress. These are the things that I have learned in the 40 years that I've been working in this field. First of all, corporations are externalizing machines. 100% of their energy will always go into externalizing costs. And secondarily, then they will look at actually making money, but they will always try to offload as many costs as they can. And it is one of the fundamental contributions of good corporate governance that we minimize externalities and make them earn money on their own. Boards are like subatomic particles. They behave differently when they're observed, and it's the job of the shareholders to let them know that we're observing them. Every time you try to rationalize CEO pay, you pour gasoline on the fire. It gets worse. I'm still not sure how to solve that. I know what it should look like. How to get to that point, I don't know, unless it's voting against the compensation committee every time. Markets are still efficient, sometimes now, sometimes it takes quite a long time. Shareholder primacy is good for companies, it's good for employees, it's good for the economy, and it's even good for the other shareholders. And if in fact they are going to try to clamp down on us in terms of shareholder proposals and proxy advisory services, the next action that we'll have to take will have to be more drastic. And one thing I'm looking at now is making it impossible for them to get a quorum. If we get people together and decide not to vote, not to give them that opportunity, so they have to reschedule the annual meeting, then things like Elon Musk's $1 trillion pay package will not be able to go forward. Even though he has now cut off the opportunity to take him to court over it, it can't happen unless the meeting is concluded legally, and that requires a quorum. So that is my drastic proposal if everything else goes south. Thank you all very much. I'm always happy to hear from you. If you want to email me anytime at Value Edge Advisors, I'm always glad to hear what you have to say and answer any questions.
Thank you, Nell. Very, very insightful keynote. I think that the audience has, and the audience also later on YouTube, will definitely benefit from these insights. These are very, very critical times, and your points were spot on, as they usually are. I had already watched the 2 hearings, and I also had many further questions, which I think that you very generously covered today for all of us. So thank you so much. Stay where you are as I move you off stage for the final keynote. Thank you again. And we hope to see you again in one of our future BPP OC forums. So I'm moving very, very quickly to our last keynote. Carmine Di Noia, Director for Financial and Enterprise Affairs at the OECD. He couldn't be with us today, but he generously provided a recording, which I will now share with all of you as I'm doing it. And of course, then I will come back for my closing remarks just before 5 BST or 6 CEST. Excellent. Just give me 1 second. I think we're all set up for Carmine's keynote. And as I said, he will be presenting the latest findings of the OECD Factbook, and also will be giving us some first news regarding the forthcoming publication of the OECD paper on proxy advisors that will come out early 2026. Thank you all. And of course, the floor goes to Carmine virtually.
Dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's a pleasure to deliver these remarks, and I would like to thank once again the Best Practice Principles Oversight Committee for the invitation, and to Professor Sergakis for his leadership in the committee and his engagement in the OECD, including his participation in the Proxy Advisory Services Roundtable, chaired by the chair of the OECD Corporate Governance Committee and chair of IOSCO, Jean-Paul Servet, last April. Apologies for the recorded video, but I'm probably flying back to Paris after the Latin American Corporate Governance Roundtable, where we have just launched OECD Governance Factbook, which I will refer to afterwards. Your annual forum provides an important platform for dialogue and reflection, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to contribute, also because in a previous role I was among the strong supporters in February 2012 at ESMA of the creation of the principles and of their self-monitoring mechanism. Throughout my remarks, I will focus on two areas, namely the 2025 edition of the OECD Corporate Governance Factbook, which is hot off the press, just published earlier this week, as I tell you, and the forthcoming OECD peer review on market service providers, which I would expect to be of special interest to this group. While this report is still under development, I can give you a bit of a preview on some of the preliminary findings, including on frameworks applicable to proxy advisors. Afterwards, I will provide some concluding remarks. First, let me provide an overview of the just published OECD Corporate Governance Factbook and the G20 OECD Principles of Corporate Governance, which it is designed to help implement. The principles are the OECD globally recognized standard for corporate governance. They help policymakers evaluate and improve the legal, regulatory, and institutional framework for corporate governance. They have been endorsed by the G20 and are one of the Financial Stability Board key standards for some financial systems. The Factbook supports the implementation of the principles. Published every 2 years, the Factbook is an important reference of how the principles are implemented, tracks evolutions in corporate governance by comparing institutional, legal, and regulatory frameworks across countries, and provides accessible and up-to-date information on relevant policies and frameworks. Given the constant changes in the global environment, marked by shifting geopolitical and economic dynamics and rapid digitalization, among other developments, policymakers and regulators are continuously adapting their corporate governance frameworks. In this regard, the principles serve as a global benchmark to support resilience, and the Factbook monitors how these frameworks evolve in practice. Together, these instruments are invaluable for navigating change and supporting effective implementation. The new edition of the Factbook, 7th edition overall, covers 52 jurisdictions, including all OECD members, most accession candidates, and the members of the G20 and of the FSB. To note, this edition includes a new chapter on sustainability, new sections on equity markets for growth companies and the conduct of general shareholder meetings, and country notes for the first time, providing overviews of each jurisdictions and recent developments up to mid-2025. In the next few slides, I will provide key findings from the Factbook on each of its 5 chapters, first starting with global public markets and corporate ownership. By end of 2024, there were approximately 44,000 listed companies worldwide, with a combined market cap of US dollars 125 trillion. Compared to 2022, this has been stable, though market capitalization has increased by 28%. However, looking at the longer term, more than 35,000 companies have delisted from public stock markets globally since 2005. This decline is a concern as it reduces the number of firms able to benefit from access to public equity markets, still an important source of funding, increasingly driven by secondary public offerings, SPOs. Between 2014 and 2024, SPOs raised 2.5 times more capital than IPOs, initial public offerings, shifting the global funding balance. Today, institutional investors hold 47% of the global listed equity. Their dominant position is largely driven by their importance in the largest market, the US, where they hold 2/3 of the listed equity. In terms of corporate governance and institutional frameworks, the fact book shows that, among other things, during 2023-2024, nearly 2/3 of jurisdictions updated their corporate governance frameworks. 73% publish a national report on a company's adherence to governance codes, most covering all listed companies and all provisions. The number of such reports has nearly doubled over the past decade. In all jurisdictions, public regulators, typically securities or financial authorities, have the power to supervise and enforce governance practices of listed companies. The fact book also highlights the evolution of shareholder rights. By 2024, 60% of jurisdictions allowed companies to issue shares with unequal voting rights, up from 44% in 2020. Practices around shareholder meetings have also shifted. Virtual meetings that began during the COVID-19 pandemic have now become common. 85% of jurisdictions permit virtual-only meetings, and 94% allow hybrid meetings, both up by about 10% since 2022. All of those surveyed require companies to provide advance notice of general shareholder meetings, with 38% setting a minimum notice period of 21 days. The most common minimum ownership threshold for requesting an extraordinary meeting or placing an agenda item is 5%. The OECD has also carried out more in-depth work on these topics, which you may recall I presented to you in this forum last year. This peer review report, Shareholder Meetings and Corporate Governance, Trends and Implication, was published in April 2025. Turning to the board of directors, the fact book highlights growing efforts to strengthen independence and effectiveness. Based on its findings, 76% of jurisdictions require or encourage separation of the chair and CEO roles, up from 44% in 2014. The fact book also highlights progress on gender diversity. 2/3 of those surveyed require listed companies to disclose their gender composition of their boards. On average, women hold 29% of board seats, up from 22% in 2019. Most jurisdictions also require either 2 to 3 independent directors or at least 1/3 of the board to be independent, with the most common recommendation being a 50% share of independent directors. Finally, on corporate sustainability, a new chapter in the fact book. By end 2024, 79% of fact book jurisdictions require sustainability-related disclosures, and 65% identifying multiple stakeholders as their primary users. In addition, 60% of jurisdictions have established assurance requirements to improve the quality of sustainability-related information, while another 17% are considering such measures. Jurisdictions take different approaches to sustainability assurance, allowing it to be provided either by statutory auditors or other service providers. Many also distinguish between reasonable assurance, a level of review comparable to external audits of financial statements, and limited assurance, which involves a more restricted review. Now, this concludes the main findings of the fact book. We have also released 13 country notes, providing overviews of each jurisdiction framework, with the remaining notes to be published in October and December of this year. Let me now turn to the peer review of market service providers. We are currently finalizing the first draft with an aim to publish the report by early next year. I'm pleased to share some preliminary findings that provide a valuable snapshot of corporate governance frameworks for proxy advisors worldwide. The G20 OECD principles call for greater transparency and accountability among proxy advisors, ESG ratings, and data providers, credit rating agencies, and index providers. Currently, there is a growing policy debate on whether additional regulation of proxy advisors is needed or whether existing market mechanisms are sufficient. Our goal is to support a balanced approach, one that safeguards the integrity of proxy advisory services and preserves their important role in enabling informed shareholder engagement. First, regarding the structure and scope of our new peer review on market service providers. So far, we have gathered data from 50 jurisdictions, and to enrich the analysis, we provide 3 in-depth case studies on Belgium, Chile, and India, offering national perspectives and lessons of broader relevance. To understand how different markets regulate and engage with these actors, the review examines proxy advisors, ESG rating and data providers, and index providers, all of which play important roles in corporate governance and capital markets. Understanding how they operate and are regulated is essential for shaping effective policy responses. The report looks in particular at transparency of methodologies, conflict of interest rules, and requirements for registration or authorization. As mentioned earlier, institutional investors today hold substantial stakes in listed companies worldwide, amounting to 47% of total equity holdings at the end of 2024. As a result, there is growing scrutiny of institutional investors' stewardship responsibilities. In this context, proxy advisory firms have emerged as key actors, helping institutional investors exercise their voting rights in corporate elections and on critical governance issues. Across the 50 jurisdictions included in this peer review, approximately 60% have frameworks grounded in law or regulation. 10% address proxy advisors through voluntary codes or principles to which market participants may choose to adhere. 30% do not yet have a specific framework dedicated to proxy advisors. To date, EU member states have implemented the Shareholder Rights Directive 2, SRD2. And Norway and the UK have also incorporated SRD2 into their frameworks. Outside Europe, a number of jurisdictions have either regulations or recommendations for proxy advisors. These include Australia, Canada, India, Israel, Japan, Malaysia, Singapore, and Switzerland. Disclosure of methodologies is a key focus of the review. Currently, 58 of jurisdictions require proxy advisors to disclose their methodologies, and an additional 8% encourage disclosure through voluntary codes. However, 34% still lack such requirements. While proxy recommendations must be interpreted within the legal, market, and company context in which they are applied, most jurisdictions do not require proxy advisors to consider national or company-specific conditions. Only Israel has binding requirements, while Canada, France, Japan, and Singapore encourage such practice. In addition, 90% of the jurisdictions currently have no requirements regarding competence, ethics, and independence of proxy advisory staff. This raises the question of how expectations for practices in this area may be established in practice. On disclosing conflict of interest, our preliminary findings show significant variation. 58% of jurisdictions address disclosure through laws or regulations, 8% through voluntary codes, while 34% still lack any framework. Requirements for other disclosure related to potential conflicts, such as for secondary services or ownership structures, has, for the most part, not been established to date. While I focus mainly on proxy advisors, actually similar findings will also be available for other market service providers. Finally, let me provide some concluding remarks. The OECD Corporate Governance Factbook is a cornerstone for evidence-based policymaking. It reflects the OECD commitment to fostering transparent and resilient capital markets and supporting the implementation of the G20 OECD principles as a driver of economic growth and financial stability. Regarding the peer review, the diversity of approaches across jurisdictions reflects varying market context and policy priorities. Our aim is not to prescribe a one-size-fits-all model, but rather to draw lessons from global experience, highlight effective practices, consider where greater clarity, particularly on definitions, transparency, and conflict management, could benefit both markets and investors. I look forward to sharing these findings with you in due course. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to being in person with you next year.
And of course, thank you to Carmine for his keynote. A very quick concluding remark from my side. I would like to thank you all for participating again this year in the 5th BPP OC annual forum. I think that the key takeaways are clear. We need to maintain dialogue. And of course, we take very seriously the feedback we received also from the panelists regarding communicating more what we do, the work we conduct, and all the effort that goes into what we do, but also the continuous improvements that we keep on observing. Anna also mentioned it before in the area of disclosure of BPP signatory parties. Of course, it is our intention to keep on intensifying these efforts. And of course, I have the pleasure, as I promised at the beginning of the forum, to announce that we have succeeded in introducing a new, the inaugural enforcement protocol at the BPP OC. After continuous discussions with the signatory parties, we will be publicly sharing the enforcement protocol, which is the first in its history in the BPP OC, in the annual report that will come out in November 2025, in a month's time. And we will, of course, keep on engaging with all of you, and as well as with other stakeholders, in order to keep on intensifying our efforts, as I said, and keep on fulfilling our mission. So thank you all again for being part of this ongoing journey. It's not an easy journey, but it's definitely worth taking and embarking upon together. And we will see you again next year. Thank you all. Bye-bye.